I've always thought of my life as the perfect one that many would envy. I live in a quiet, leafy suburb, far from the noise of the city. My house is cozy, elegant, and surrounded by beautiful gardens. It's the kind of place where families thrive, where neighbors wave as you drive by, and everyone seems content. Daniel, my husband, is everything I ever wanted in a partner. He's handsome, charming, and successful. He's the type of man who walks into a room and commands attention without even trying. He owns a growing tech firm, and it's no secret that his business acumen has brought us a comfortable, almost luxurious lifestyle. We travel the world, dine in fine restaurants, and live a life most would only dream of. I feel lucky, so lucky, in fact, that I often wonder if I deserve it. How did someone like me, average, unassuming, end up with a man like him? I think it must be fate. And our marriage? It's everything I imagined it could be. We don't argue, we support each other, and we share everything. At least, I thought we did. But that all changed one rainy afternoon in late autumn. It started with something so trivial, something that now feels so insignificant in comparison to what followed. I was cleaning out the back closet when I found an old, dusty box tucked away behind some winter coats. It was an unmarked cardboard box, yellowing with age. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. Inside were a few old photographs, a wedding album, and what looked like a stack of letters. They were all tied with a fraying ribbon, as though someone had carefully preserved them. I flipped through the album first. There were pictures of Daniel, but not the ones I was familiar with. These were older, taken when he was younger, before I met him. He looked the same, handsome, but in these photos, he was always with a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful in a quiet way, dark hair, pale skin, soft eyes. They looked so in love, it made me uncomfortable. The last photograph in the album took my breath away. It was a picture of Daniel holding a baby, a little girl. She had the same dark hair, the same eyes. There was a smile on his face I had never seen before, one that was filled with such tenderness and care. My heart skipped a beat. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I couldn't. But there it was, proof that Daniel had been married before, that he had a child, and he had never told me about any of this. I sat there, stunned, holding the photo of him with the little girl. My mind raced with questions I hadn't even known to ask. Why had he never mentioned any of this? Was it just a past he wanted to forget? Or worse, was there something more to this than I could understand? I placed the photo back in the album, feeling a strange sense of betrayal I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the woman or the child. It was the fact that Daniel had hidden this part of his life from me. From the very beginning, it felt like a lie, like something had been kept in the shadows while I was led to believe our life together was built on truth and openness. As I put the album back in the box, I noticed something else, a letter, yellowed with age, sticking out from beneath the ribbon. My hand shook as I picked it up, the words on the envelope written in elegant handwriting, to Daniel, from Emily. I didn't know who Emily was, but at that moment, it didn't matter. I had to know. I had to know everything. The letter was sealed, but the edges were worn, as if it had been opened many times before. The moment I held it in my hands, something inside me twisted. I knew I had crossed a line, but I couldn't stop. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the delicate paper. The handwriting was neat and flowing, but the words struck me like a cold slap. Daniel, I know this might be the hardest thing for you to read, but I can't pretend any longer. I've been keeping this secret for too long, and I can no longer stay silent. Sarah deserves to know the truth about our past, about what we had. She deserves to know the truth about our daughter. You promised me you'd tell her one day, but I can't wait anymore. I just can't. I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. My head spun as I read and reread the letter. Our daughter. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I had no idea what this meant, but I knew one thing. Emily wasn't just some woman from Daniel's past, she had been his wife, and they had a child together. I set the letter down, my heart racing. What was going on? Why hadn't he ever mentioned Emily or their daughter? Did he think I wouldn't find out? Or had he been hoping the past would stay buried forever? I glanced back at the photo of Daniel with the little girl. I didn't recognize her, but I felt a deep ache in my chest. What was her name? How old was she now? Did Daniel still keep in touch with her? I needed answers, but asking Daniel would be too easy. I had to know everything, every detail. I had to see for myself what he'd hidden from me for so long. So I decided to investigate. I couldn't just let this lie sit in my heart. The next day, I went to the library. I told Daniel I had errands to run, that I needed some time for myself. He never questioned me. He never does. I could feel the tension rising inside me as I researched everything I could about Daniel's past. I pulled up old records, looked up his previous address, his name in newspapers, anything that might give me a clue. And then, I found something. An obituary. It wasn't just any obituary, though. It was for Emily. My hands went cold as I read it. Emily had passed away 5 years ago. It was a brief notice, nothing particularly sentimental, just a few lines mentioning her as a mother and a wife. The date of her death struck me like a hammer, just a year before Daniel and I had met. I couldn't believe what I was reading. How could he have never told me? How could he have kept this from me when it had been such a pivotal part of his life? His first wife had died, and he'd never once spoken about it to me. I sat there in the library for what felt like hours, staring at the obituary, trying to piece together what I had learned. There was something about this whole situation that felt off, something about the way Daniel had swept his past under the rug, as though it didn't matter anymore. I went home that evening with a knot in my stomach. I had to confront him, but what would I say? How could I approach him without completely shattering the image of our life together? Was I ready for the truth, no matter what it might be? I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I had to find out. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, his calm, confident smile that had always reassured me. But now, it felt like a mask, hiding a man I didn't know. The weight of what I had learned pressed down on me, suffocating me. How had he kept these secrets for so long? How had I missed it all? The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. I could feel Daniel's presence as he moved around the kitchen, preparing for work. The silence between us was suffocating. It wasn't like before, where we'd exchange playful banter or discuss our plans for the weekend. Now, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of what would happen if I took the next step. I had to ask him. The truth had to come out, no matter how painful it would be. I had to confront him, even if it meant shattering the life we had built. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady but tight, "we need to talk." He looked up from his coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. He could tell something was off, but he didn't know the half of it. "I found something," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I found a letter, and a photo album, and," I hesitated, my hands shaking slightly, "and I know about Emily." His face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks. His eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, to the side. He was trying to remain calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers clenched around his mug. "You shouldn't have gone looking," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I didn't want you to know any of this." I swallowed hard, but I deserved to know. "Daniel, you lied to me. You lied about your past, about Emily, about your daughter. You kept this secret for years, and I deserve an explanation." He sighed, setting the coffee mug down with a quiet clink. "It's not as simple as you think," he said, rubbing his temples. I didn't want to burden you with all of it. I thought it was behind me. Emily's death. It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And our daughter. She was just a reminder of everything I lost. I thought that if I kept it all in the past, I could move on. I didn't want to bring that pain into our lives. His words hit me like a wave, but I couldn't let my emotions sway me. I needed to keep control. But you should have told me, Daniel. You should have trusted me enough to share this. I can't believe you thought you could keep something this important from me. He looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt. I know I should have told you, but the past is messy, Sarah. It's not just about Emily or the child. There's a lot more to it than that. Things I didn't want to drag you into. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What do you mean? What else is there? He hesitated, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Emily wasn't just my wife. She had her own secrets. And our daughter, well, she's part of a bigger story, one that's far darker than you can imagine. I didn't want you to be involved in any of it. I could feel the fear creeping into my chest. What kind of story are you talking about, Daniel? What are you hiding? He stood up suddenly, pacing back and forth. I never wanted you to get tangled in all of this. There are people, dangerous people, who were part of Emily's life. People I had to distance myself from after her death. I thought I could keep it all quiet, keep you safe. But now, I see how deep the lies run. I never should have kept you in the dark. I felt a chill spread across my skin. What kind of people? What are you involved in, Daniel? He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face twisted with regret. I can't tell you everything. Not yet. It's too dangerous. But if you want to understand, you're going to have to trust me. The past is coming back, and it's going to catch up with us. And I'm afraid that once it does, we won't be able to stop it. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The words he was saying didn't make sense. Dangerous people? What had I married into? What had been hidden from me all these years? I need to know more, I said, my voice trembling. I can't just sit here and pretend that everything is fine anymore. You owe me that, Daniel. I need to know everything. He looked at me, his eyes filled with fear and regret. I don't know if you're ready for the truth, but if you want to go down this path, there's no turning back. Things are about to get a lot darker than you think. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. Dangerous people. The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, like he was talking about a business deal gone wrong, sent a chill through me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just married to a successful businessman. I was married to a man with a past that was beginning to unravel, and I had no idea what I was really tangled up in. After our conversation, Daniel grew quieter. He withdrew into himself, like he was hiding something, and I could feel the tension building between us. I couldn't stop myself from pressing him further. Every time I tried to talk to him, though, he'd deflect or shut me down, telling me that it was for my own safety. But I wasn't a fool. I knew he was keeping things from me, and the more he pulled away, the more determined I became to uncover the truth. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and uneventful days. I tried to push the nagging thoughts from my mind, but they wouldn't leave. I had to know what Daniel was hiding, and I was willing to go to any lengths to find out. That's when I found the second letter. I was cleaning out the drawers in the study when I stumbled upon it. Tucked behind a stack of old receipts and business papers was another envelope, this one marked with a faded red wax seal. My heart skipped a beat. Was this another letter from Emily? I opened it carefully, afraid of what it might contain. This one was different. It wasn't as personal as the first one, but it was more cryptic. The handwriting was sharp and precise, almost cold in its formality. Daniel, you need to stop hiding from the truth. If you ever want to make amends, you will have to face it. The people you owe will not wait forever, and neither will she. Your daughter deserves to know the truth, whether you like it or not. And if you keep running from your past, it will catch up with you, and it will destroy everything you've built. Don't say I didn't warn you. The letter felt like a threat, but it also felt like a plea. Someone knew things I didn't. Someone knew about Daniel's daughter, and they knew about the people he was running from. I read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of them, but they only raised more questions. Who was this letter from? And who was the she they referred to? My mind raced with possibilities, but I couldn't seem to connect the dots. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't rely on Daniel to give me the answers. If he wouldn't open up to me, then I'd have to dig deeper on my own. I started researching the people Daniel had been involved with, his former business partners, old friends, anyone who might know something about his past. But the more I searched, the more I realized just how much I didn't know. There were names that kept popping up, names I had never heard before, and they were always associated with large sums of money and dangerous deals. It wasn't just about a failed marriage or a child. It was something much bigger. A week passed, and I couldn't get the image of that obituary out of my head. Emily had died, but why did Daniel seem so afraid of her past? What had she been involved in? Was she part of whatever dark world Daniel had tried to leave behind? I needed answers, but each time I pushed for more information, Daniel clammed up, refusing to speak any further. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I followed him. He didn't know I was behind him, but I had a feeling he was going to meet someone important. My heart raced as I watched him drive to a rundown part of town, far from the polished streets where we lived. I waited in the shadows, watching as he stepped out of the car and walked into a small, dimly lit building. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was he meeting? Why had he come here? I waited for what felt like hours. Finally, the door opened, and Daniel stepped out, followed by a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and dark, piercing eyes. They exchanged a few words before Daniel handed him a small envelope. The man took it, glancing over his shoulder nervously before walking off into the darkness. I felt a pang of dread wash over me. What had just happened? What was in that envelope? Why had Daniel been meeting with someone like that? I hurried back to the car, my mind spinning. Daniel had always been so careful, so controlled, but this was different. This was a man who was running from something, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. The feeling that I was being pulled deeper into a web I couldn't escape from intensified with every passing day. I couldn't shake the image of Daniel handing the envelope over to that man in the shadows. I had seen enough in that brief moment to know that whatever was in that envelope was important, dangerously so. But what was it? And why had Daniel kept this meeting from me? The next few days, I watched him more closely. Every time he left for work, I felt like I was being left behind in a world I no longer understood. I began to notice small things that never bothered me before. The way he checked his phone in private, the way he hurried through phone calls and conversations when I walked into the room, the tension in his posture when I asked him about his day. The cracks in the perfect facade we had built were growing wider, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. That evening, I decided to confront him again. I had already waited long enough. The truth couldn't stay hidden any longer. I waited until after dinner when we were sitting in the living room, the house quiet and still. Daniel was flipping through channels, pretending not to notice the weight of my gaze. "Daniel," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I need to know what's going on. I can't keep living like this, feeling like there's something massive hanging over us. The lies, the secrets, it's too much. I can't ignore it anymore." He looked at me, his face a mixture of frustration and guilt. "Sarah, I've told you everything I can. You don't understand how dangerous it is. I'm trying to protect you. You don't need to know the details. Not yet. I can't put you in that position." His words were hollow. Protect me? From what, Daniel? From who? He stood up suddenly, his hand rubbing his face in frustration. "I didn't want this life for you. I didn't want you to be part of all this. But now, there's no turning back. You've already started digging, and you're only going to get more hurt." I don't care about getting hurt, I snapped, standing up as well. I care about you, about us. I want to understand what I've gotten myself into, what kind of person I married. I have a right to know. There was a long silence, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally break, but then he closed himself off, his features hardening. You really want to know everything? He said finally, his voice low and edged with something darker. All right, then, but be prepared. This isn't something you can just walk away from. This is bigger than you think. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm ready. I want the truth. Daniel's face was tight with restraint as he took a deep breath, and then he began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily wasn't just a normal woman, Sarah. She was involved with some very dangerous people. I don't know all the details, but I know enough. She got wrapped up in something she shouldn't have. When she died, well, let's just say her death wasn't an accident. My stomach dropped. You mean, she was murdered? He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. I don't know, but I wouldn't rule it out. After she died, I tried to cut ties with her past, but there were people who didn't want to let go, and they didn't just want to take her down, they wanted to destroy everything connected to her. That includes me, and now, it includes you. My mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. You're telling me that you've been running from these people ever since Emily's death? Yes, he said, his voice thick with regret. I didn't want you to know because I didn't want you to get dragged into it. But the truth is, they've been following me for years. They're still out there, and now they know about you. The past is coming for us, Sarah, and no matter how much I've tried to bury it, I can't stop it anymore. I felt the room closing in on me. My life, the life I thought I knew, was slipping away. The man I married, the man I had trusted, had been living a double life, and now, I was tangled in it too. Who are these people? I whispered, my voice shaking. What do they want? Daniel's face was grim as he sat back down. I don't know who exactly, but I know they're part of a larger network. They've got connections everywhere, money, power, and influence. Emily was the link, the one who could have kept them all together, but once she was gone, they needed someone to replace her, someone to take the fall. I felt sick to my stomach, and now they want me? Daniel's eyes softened with pain. They want both of us, but mostly, they want to make sure that everything Emily was a part of stays buried. They want to make sure I never get out of this world, and I don't know how much longer I can protect you from it. I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of his words. The life I had so carefully built with him was a lie. The secrets, the deceit, it was all crashing down around me. I didn't ask for this, Sarah, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want to drag you into this mess, but now that you know, there's no going back. We're both in this, and I don't know how we're going to get out. I stood there in shock, my body frozen in place as Daniel's words echoed in my mind. They want both of us. I couldn't comprehend it. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling away, and I was left hanging in the air, unable to breathe. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was suffocating, oppressive. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, was now a stranger to me. What kind of life had he been leading? How had I missed all the signs, or had I just chosen not to see them? Finally, I found my voice. So what now, Daniel? What do we do? How do we get out of this? My words were raw, filled with the terror and confusion that had been building up inside me for days. He shook his head slowly, his face etched with despair. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know how to fix this. These people, they have too many resources. They'll come after us, after me, and they won't stop until they've destroyed everything. And you, he looked at me, his gaze filled with guilt and something else, something like regret. You're too close to the truth now. They'll want to silence you too. I felt a cold chill creep down my spine. Silence me? I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't pretend that everything was normal anymore. I had already crossed a line, and I couldn't go back. But I also couldn't let this be the end of everything I had worked for, the life I had built with Daniel. My instincts screamed at me to fight back, to take control of this situation before it swallowed me whole. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You want us to run? Hide? Is that the plan?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up, pacing around the room like a man trapped in his own mind. "I don't know what else to do, Sarah. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you out of it, but now that you know, I don't know if there's any way out. There are people I've crossed, deals I've made that I can't undo. I'm not the man I was when we first met. I've been living in fear, running from my past, and I've dragged you into it." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. My heart was racing, but I couldn't let fear take over. Not now, not when everything was on the line. "You didn't drag me into it, Daniel. I'm here because of you. I chose to be here, but I won't just sit back and let this happen. We have to fight back. We can't just wait for them to come for us." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. "You don't understand. It's not that simple. They have people everywhere. They can reach us anytime. They'll make sure we don't get away." I shook my head, frustration building inside me. "Then we fight. We don't let them win. We find out who they are, and we expose them. We take back control of our lives." Daniel was silent for a long moment. I could see the weight of the decision bearing down on him, the inner conflict warring inside him. He was torn between protecting me and protecting himself from the people he feared most. "You're right," he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "We can't keep running. I'll help you. We'll do this together. But you have to understand one thing. This won't be easy. These people, they don't play by the rules. And if we're going to fight them, we need to be smarter than they are." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes. We're in this together, Daniel. No more secrets." He stepped forward, his expression softening. For the first time in days, I saw the man I had married, the one I trusted. "All right, then, we'll start looking for answers, but we have to be careful. We can't let them know we're onto them." As I stood there, facing the man I thought I knew, I realized just how far we had fallen. The life we had built together was no longer about love or trust. It was about survival. And from that moment on, everything changed. We began to dig deeper, researching every person connected to Emily's past, to Daniel's previous life. We found names that had once been forgotten, buried deep in the shadows. People who had known Emily and who had their own stakes in the game. Slowly, we pieced together the puzzle, and what we uncovered shocked me to my core. There was one name, a name that kept popping up in all the files and records we found: Victor Donovan. Victor Donovan was a man who had been closely connected to Emily's business dealings, a man with a criminal empire, a man who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and he was the one person who could bring everything crashing down, if he hadn't already. Victor Donovan. I whispered the name, feeling the weight of it settle on my chest. "He's the one behind this, isn't he?" Daniel's face hardened. "Yes. And he's not someone you want to cross." It all started to feel like it was slipping out of control. After discovering the deep, twisted layers of Daniel's past, his ex-wife, his children, the secrets that had remained hidden for so long, Sarah felt like everything she had known was a lie. Betrayal wasn't just a word now. It was her reality, and she wanted revenge, not just to hurt Daniel for his deceit, but for everything she had lost, for everything that had been kept from her. As Sarah started to unravel the mystery, she realized it wasn't just about Daniel's secrets. There were darker forces at play, forces connected to Victor Donovan, a powerful figure in Daniel's life whose shadow loomed over everything. The more Sarah dug into Donovan's past, the more she uncovered dark truths, dangerous alliances, and crimes that would destroy Daniel if they came to light. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous the game became. One evening, after weeks of digging, a figure appeared at their door, a man in a black suit, cold and calculating. He introduced himself as Agent Steele, sent by Donovan to warn them off. "We know what you're doing. It's too late to back out. You're already dead." The message from Donovan's people made it clear. There was no turning back. Daniel tried to remain calm, but it was obvious that the situation was spiraling out of control. He was scared of the man on the other side of the door, and of the consequences of everything they had uncovered. Despite his fears, he refused to back down. "We've come too far," he said, his voice hardening. "We can't stop now." But Sarah wasn't so sure. Fear had begun to seep into her, too. Donovan wasn't just a man from Daniel's past. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he had the power to crush them both if they weren't careful. The warning from Steele was chilling, but it only fueled Sarah's resolve. She knew they had to keep pushing forward, no matter what. Still, there was a part of Sarah that felt something else creeping into her mind, something darker. The desire for revenge had become all-consuming, and the more she uncovered about Donovan, the more she realized how deep the rabbit hole went. The lies, the manipulation, the control Donovan had over Daniel's life. It was a web, and they were trapped in it. "We need help," Daniel said one night, looking at her with a mix of fear and desperation. "We can't do this alone." There was one person Sarah could think of who might be able to help, her father. Though they hadn't spoken in years, he had the connections, the resources, and the power to get them out of this mess. He wasn't a man she trusted completely, but right now, there was no other option. "I'll call him," she said, though she wasn't sure how Daniel would react. Her father had always been a complicated figure in her life, but in this moment, he was their only shot. She dialed his number, the phone ringing until her father finally picked up. His voice was rough and distant. "Sarah, what do you want?" "Dad, I need your help," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. There was a long silence on the other end. "With what?" "Victor Donovan," Sarah said, the name heavy with all the pain and fear it carried. "He's after us, and I need you to help us take him down." Her father didn't answer right away. She could hear him exhale slowly, weighing the decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice colder than she remembered. "You're in deeper than you think, Sarah. You don't get involved with Donovan without consequences." "I know, but I don't have a choice. We need everything you've got." There was another pause. Then, reluctantly, he said, "All right, I'll help, but once you're in, there's no going back. You understand?" "I understand," she said, her heart pounding. That night, Daniel and Sarah gathered everything they had: files, recordings, any evidence that could expose Donovan for what he truly was. It wasn't enough, but it had to be. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. With her father's resources coming through, they had the tools to take down Donovan. But the stakes had never been higher. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every second felt like a countdown, but they had no choice. They uploaded the evidence to the press, watching as the truth began to spread. Articles appeared. Investigations were launched. Donovan's empire was starting to crumble. But as the truth spread, Sarah realized how dangerous things had become. Donovan wouldn't take this lying down. He would fight back, and he wouldn't stop until he silenced them. That night, as Sarah prepared to upload the final piece of evidence, she received a chilling message from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing. It's too late to back out. You're already dead." It was Donovan's warning, but it didn't stop her. "It's now or never," Sarah said, her fingers trembling as she hit send. The articles began to spread like wildfire. The truth about Donovan's past, his crimes, his lies, was out there. But as the world reacted, The realization hit Sarah. They had crossed a line. Donovan wouldn't just go away. He'd retaliate. And there was no way to predict how far he was willing to go. The game had changed. They weren't just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for their lives. The storm had already begun, but now it was here in full force. The truth about Donovan was out, and the world was starting to react. But as the media frenzy took hold, there was a quiet, deadly undercurrent to the situation. Donovan wasn't just a man who could be exposed. He was a force, a dangerous one, with connections and power that reached far deeper than we had ever imagined. Daniel and I sat in the dimly lit room, our phones buzzing nonstop, the weight of the evidence we had shared growing heavier by the minute. We had put it all out there, his lies, his past, everything that had been hidden for so long. But even as the world turned against him, I knew we were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I kept replaying that final message in my mind, "You're already dead." It was impossible to ignore the chill that had settled in my bones. Donovan had seen this coming. He wasn't going to just sit back and let his empire crumble. He was already plotting his retaliation. Daniel stood up, pacing back and forth. "Do you think we've gone too far? That maybe we should have." "No," I interrupted him, my voice firm despite the uncertainty clawing at me. "We did what we had to do. There was no other choice. He was going to destroy us if we didn't fight back." The room felt suffocating. I knew that the consequences of what we had done were far from over. We had exposed Donovan, but that exposure had made us his enemies. No amount of preparation could shield us from the storm he was about to unleash. The phone rang again. I stared at it, my heart racing as I saw the name flashing on the screen, an unlisted number, one I didn't recognize. For a moment, I froze. I knew it was him, Donovan. I answered the call with a shaking breath. "Sarah, do you think you're safe now?" Donovan's voice was cold, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You've made a terrible mistake. You won't get away with this," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The world knows now. There's no hiding from the truth anymore." "Oh, I don't need to hide. You're the ones who are exposed, Sarah. I'll make sure of that." My stomach twisted with fear, but I refused to let him see it. "You'll never control us again." There was a long pause, then a chilling laugh. "You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet. You've made your bed. Now, lie in it." The call ended, and I stood there, holding the phone, trying to steady my breathing. Donovan wasn't done. This wasn't over by a long shot. "Sarah," Daniel's voice trailed off as he watched me, his face pale. "What now?" I looked at him, my mind racing. The next steps had to be calculated. We couldn't afford to make another mistake. We can't run anymore. We've already exposed him. Now we have to finish what we started. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't be that simple. Donovan wasn't just a man we could defeat with a few well-timed pieces of information. He was a predator, and we were the prey. We needed to think 2 steps ahead, maybe more. Days blurred together as we prepared for the inevitable. Every sound outside the house seemed to echo in our ears. Every car that drove by made our hearts skip a beat. Donovan was out there, somewhere, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move. We had secured some protection. My father's influence had come through, but it was clear that we were still vulnerable. There was only so much we could do before Donovan's reach found us. Finally, the day came when everything collided. I received a message from a trusted contact, someone who had been following Donovan's movements. "He's here. He's coming for you." It was time. We didn't have much of a plan. The only option now was to confront him directly. We had the evidence. We had the truth. But did we have the strength to face him in person? Daniel was quieter than I had ever seen him. He was ready to fight, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of everything we had been through, the fear of what might happen next. It was all bearing down on him. I grabbed his hand. squeezing it. We've come too far to back down now. He nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. I'm with you. Whatever happens, we do this together. We made our way to the location where we knew Donovan would be. The tension was unbearable. Every footstep, every turn, felt like a countdown to something we couldn't stop. And then, we saw him. Victor Donovan stood in front of us, his cold, calculating eyes locking onto ours. He was everything I had imagined, powerful, confident, and dangerous. But there was something else too, a hint of something, desperate, as if he knew this was the end of his reign. So, you've come to finish it, have you? Donovan said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You think you've won? You think you can destroy everything I've built? We're not here to destroy anything, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. We're here to expose the truth. You've been hiding behind lies for too long. It's over. Donovan's smile was cold, a stark contrast to the fire in his eyes. You think you've exposed me? You've only exposed yourselves. In that moment, I realized how much power he still held. He wasn't just trying to save his empire, he was trying to break us, to make us question everything we had done. But I couldn't let him, not now, not after everything we had sacrificed. You've taken enough from us, Daniel said, his voice hard and unwavering. It ends today. Donovan took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he seemed to evaluate us. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he muttered, almost to himself. You think the world will just move on because of your little revelations? I built this world, and I will destroy anyone who tries to take it from me. But there was something in his words that made me pause. He sounded desperate. For all his power and threats, Donovan was cornered, and that desperation was something I had never seen before. We're not afraid of you anymore, I said, my voice breaking the silence between us. And we'll make sure the truth gets out, no matter what you do. For a moment, there was silence. It was as if everything had stopped, the tension, the fear, the game we had been playing. Donovan stared at us, his expression unreadable. Then, something shifted in him. His shoulders slumped, just slightly, and he exhaled a deep, resigned breath. You don't understand, he said quietly, more to himself than to us. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had it all under control. I looked at him, my anger and pain mixing into something almost unbearable. You destroyed so many lives to get what you wanted. And for what? To hold on to something that isn't real? His gaze flickered to the ground for a brief moment, as if searching for words. But when he finally spoke, his voice was different, faintly resigned. I never thought it would end like this. But it was too late. The truth had already been set free, and there was no going back. With the press on their way to the location, and the evidence in hand, we had won. Donovan's empire was collapsing, and he was being exposed for the crimes he had committed over the years. But in that moment, staring at the man who had caused so much pain and heartache, I realized something else. The revenge, the satisfaction of bringing him down, it wasn't enough. It never would be. I looked at Daniel, who met my gaze with the same realization in his eyes. We had both been consumed by anger, by the need to right a wrong. But now, in the silence that followed, we understood what we had lost in the process. The cost of our actions had been higher than we imagined. We hadn't just broken Donovan, we had broken something in ourselves too. As Donovan was taken away, his empire crumbling around him, I turned to Daniel. We did what we had to do, but now we need to figure out how to move forward, together. Daniel nodded slowly. We will, one step at a time. Months passed, and the dust finally began to settle. The truth about Donovan had come out. His crimes were exposed, and his influence was shattered. The world moved on, as it always did, but we were left to pick up the pieces of our own lives. It wasn't easy, rebuilding trust, Rebuilding ourselves, those things took time. The anger, the bitterness, the need for revenge, those feelings had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding that the past couldn't be undone. All we could do now was move forward. Daniel and I started fresh, learning to trust each other again, learning to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves. We faced the future together, knowing that the journey ahead would be complicated and uncertain, but at least we were no longer bound by the past. We had lost so much, but we had gained something, too, the strength to choose our own path. And that, in the end, was worth everything.